Hey guys, tonight we're not walking through the grand halls of recorded history. We're stepping away from dusty timelines and the epics carved in stone. Instead, we're going to listen for something much quieter, much older, an echo that has resonated since the dawn of our species. We are going to explore the entire story of love as it first emerged, long before history was ever written. As we settle in for this journey, if this kind of storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe. But only if it truly brings you peace. This space is for your quiet, so get comfortable. Let the world settle around you, letting its sharp edges soften into a gentle blur. Now, dim the lights. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's journey back, not just into time, but into the very heart of what it means to be human. Before we can speak of love, we must first understand the silence from which it grew. Imagine, if you will, a world without a past. Not a world that didn't have one, of course, but a world where the past was not a library of books or a scroll of recorded deeds. It was simply the soil under your feet, the shape of a familiar mountain, the memory of a grandparent's face. History was not written. It was lived and breathed, and then it dissolved back into the earth like morning mist. Picture the sky. At night, it was an immense, overwhelming blanket of silver, undimmed by the glow of any city. The stars were not just points of light. They were a map, a calendar, a source of myth and wonder. The moon's slow, steady cycle was the only clock that mattered, pulling the tides and marking the passage of time, not in minutes or hours, but in waxing and waning. The sun's journey dictated the rhythm of all life. To wake, to hunt, to gather, to sleep. This was the pulse of the world, a slow, deep, and steady heartbeat. There were no names for the ages, no Paleolithic, no Neolithic. There was only the long, unbroken thread of now, stretching back into a darkness too deep to comprehend. The world was a vast, quiet, and untamed place. The wind whispering through giant ferns and over vast grassy plains made a sound that no human ear will ever hear again. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was the sound of geology, of slow-growing trees, of ice sheets growing miles away. It was a silence that held everything. And within this grand, silent expanse, our story begins. A story not of kings or empires, but of the first, quiet flicker of a feeling that would one day change everything. Now, let's bring our focus closer. From that vast landscape, let's zoom in on a flicker of light in the immense dark. A campfire. Around it, a small group of figures are huddled, their faces lit by the gentle, dancing flames. This is the heart of their world. This small circle of warmth is their shelter, their kitchen, their meeting hall, and their shield against a world that was often cold and indifferent. Their life was a symphony of survival, and every sense was an instrument. Their eyes were trained to see the subtle snap of a twig that signaled a predator, or the almost invisible print of a deer in the soft earth. Their ears were tuned to the language of the wild, the cry of a distant bird that warned of danger, the rustle in the undergrowth, the gentle sound of their own children breathing as they slept. Survival was a constant low hum beneath every moment of every day. It was the ache in their muscles after a long hunt, the gnawing feeling of hunger in a lean season, the shared relief of finding a grove of berry bushes. But it was not a life of grim, solitary struggle. Look closer at the fire. See how they sit together. They were not alone. They were a clan, a band, a family, bound by the necessity of staying alive. The world outside the firelight was filled with giant cave bears and prowling saber-toothed cats. But inside the circle of light, there was the warmth of other bodies, the comfort of a shared meal, the safety of taking turns to watch through the long, dark night. Life was fragile, yes, but it was not lonely. This shared vulnerability, this deep, unspoken reliance on one another, was the soil in which the first seeds of a deeper connection would begin to grow. It was here, in this symphony of survival, that a new note was about to be heard. For a long time, that shared need was enough. The drive to survive, to protect the young, to find food, these are powerful, ancient forces. But something else was stirring. In the quiet moments, between the hunt and the rest, something more than just instinct began to glimmer. It began not as a grand declaration, but as a quiet echo, a feeling. Imagine a glance held a second too long across the flickering flames. A hand offered to help another climb a steep rock, not just out of necessity, but out of an unspoken impulse. Imagine the sharing of a particularly sweet piece of fruit, a silent offering that said, "I thought of you." These moments were not about survival strategy. They were small, almost invisible sparks of something new. This was the beginning of empathy taking root. The ability to see another's hunger, another's fear, another's joy, and feel it as if it were your own. This wasn't a conscious decision. It was a change happening deep within the wiring of the brain. As our ancestors' brains grew more complex, so did their capacity for emotion. The primal drives for food and safety were being layered with new currents, compassion, loyalty, and a profound desire for companionship that went beyond the safety of the group. It was the birth of the individual seeing the individual. A recognition that the person beside you was not just another body to keep the predators at bay, but a unique presence in your world. A deeper current was beginning to flow, one that pulled two people together not just for a season, but perhaps for longer. A bond was forming, fragile and new, that wasn't just about making the next generation. It was about the journey, together. So how can we possibly know any of this? The world before words left no diaries, no letters, no poems. Its story is not told, but discovered. It's a puzzle pieced together from the most humble of fragments, from the quietest of witnesses. Our story, from here on out, is built upon these traces, these faint whispers from deep time. The evidence is in the bones. It's in a skeleton found in a cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal man so old and crippled by injury that he could only have survived if someone had fed him, protected him, and cared for him for years. That is not just survival. That is compassion. The evidence is in the graves. It's in a 6,000-year-old discovery in a village in Italy where two young skeletons, a man and a woman, were found locked in a final, eternal embrace. They are called the lovers of Valdaro. Their burial was not a simple disposal of the dead. It was a statement, a story of a bond so strong that even death could not break it. And the evidence is in the art, in the carefully shaped stone tools that are more beautiful than they need to be, in the red ochre powder found in burial sites, a pigment perhaps used to paint the body in a final act of love and remembrance. These are the first, faint clues. Each one is a silent testament to a world of feeling. They tell us that long before humans wrote down the word love, they were already living it. And so, with our stage set and our clues before us, Let us now look closer at these silent witnesses. Let us begin to tell their story. To understand the story of love, we have to look deeper than bone, deeper than stone. We have to look inside, at the very machinery of feeling itself. It can seem strange to think of something as magical and profound as love as a matter of chemistry. It almost feels like explaining away a sunset by talking about particles and light waves. But it isn't. To understand the recipe doesn't make the meal any less delicious. In fact, it adds a layer of wonder, a deeper appreciation for the ancient, elegant system at play. So think of this not as a science lesson, but as us learning the secrets of a master potion maker, a formula written in an invisible ink that has been passed down inside us for millions of years. The first ingredient in this ancient potion is a chemical you may have heard of: dopamine. In the simplest terms, dopamine is the chemical of wanting. It is the engine of desire, the spark of motivation. It isn't the chemical of pleasure itself, that's a different story, but the chemical that makes you seek pleasure. In the world of our ancestors, dopamine was the force that pushed them to explore the next valley, to hunt the larger beast, to reach for the higher fruit. It was the brain's way of saying, "That is good. That is valuable. Go get it." Now, imagine this system, perfected for survival, being turned toward another person, a member of a neighboring clan, perhaps seen for the first time at a seasonal gathering, or a familiar face within your own band, suddenly seen in a new light. When that initial spark of attraction occurs, the brain floods with dopamine. Suddenly, that person isn't just another human, they are a goal, a prize. This is the chemistry of the chase, the intoxicating, all-consuming focus of early-stage infatuation. It's why new love can feel like an obsession, making it hard to eat, hard to sleep. Your brain is simply doing what it was designed to do, focusing all its resources on attaining something it has deemed incredibly valuable. It's the first powerful pull, the initial, energetic step in the dance of connection. But a fire built only on dopamine would burn out quickly. It is too hot, too unstable for the long run. For a bond to last, a different kind of chemistry is needed. This is where the second ingredient comes in: oxytocin. If dopamine is the thrilling chase, oxytocin is the feeling of arriving home. It's often called the cuddle hormone or the bonding glue, and for good reason. It's a chemical that promotes feelings of calm, of trust, of deep contentment. It is released not in the pursuit of something new, but in the comfort of something familiar and safe. In the prehistoric world, oxytocin was the silent force that bound a mother to her child. It flowed during childbirth and nursing, creating an unbreakable bond of care. But its reach is far wider than that. It is released through gentle, reassuring touch, a hand on a shoulder, the act of huddling together for warmth through a long, cold night. It's released when sharing food, when working together on a common task. It is the chemical that transforms the raw, nervous energy of dopamine into the steady, quiet warmth of attachment. It's the brain's way of saying, "This is safe. This is good. You can rest here." It's the gentle magic that turns you and me into us. While oxytocin builds the gentle bridge of trust, a third ingredient helps to fortify it for the long term, to put a guardian on that bridge. This chemical is called vasopressin. It works in concert with oxytocin, but it has a slightly different role. Think of it as the chemical of the protector, the guardian of the bond. In many species, vasopressin is strongly linked to long-term pair bonding and a certain territorial instinct. It promotes a feeling of protectiveness, a desire to defend one's partner and one's family. If dopamine is the spark and oxytocin is the warm glow, vasopressin is the steady pilot light, the one that stays on. For our male ancestors, it may have been the chemical nudge that encouraged them to stick around, to protect their partner and offspring rather than simply moving on. It fosters a sense of responsibility and loyalty. It's the quiet, fierce feeling of this person is mine to care for, mine to protect. It turns a fleeting attraction into a durable, lasting alliance. It is the chemistry of fidelity. So you have these three forces working together in a silent, elegant orchestra. The thrilling, focused pursuit driven by dopamine. The calm, trusting connection nurtured by oxytocin. And the loyal, protective instinct reinforced by vasopressin. This chemical cocktail is not a modern human invention. It is an ancient evolutionary masterpiece, a system that was being fine-tuned in the brains of our ancestors as they navigated the dangers and wonders of their world. It is the biological scaffolding upon which all the complex emotions of love would eventually be built. It is the proof that the desire to connect, to bond, to care, and to protect is as fundamental to our nature as the desire to breathe. We have our ancient recipe, our chemical cocktail for connection. But a recipe is just a list of ingredients on a page until a chef comes along to interpret it, to combine the elements with skill and intuition. In our story, that chef is the brain itself. The chemicals provide the raw materials, the salt, the sugar, the spice, but the brain is what transforms them into a feast of feeling. The leap from a simple chemical reaction to the profound, complex experience we call love is one of the most beautiful stories in our history. It's the story of the mind waking up to itself. To understand this, we have to imagine the brain not as a single thing, but as a house that has been built and added onto over millions of years. The oldest part of the house, the deep, foundational cellar, is what we might call the primal brain. This is the ancient engine room, the part we share with creatures who crawled out of the sea long ago. Its concerns are stark and simple. Am I safe? Am I hungry? Is that a threat? It operates on pure instinct, a world of fight, flight, or freeze. It's the jolt of fear you feel from a sudden loud noise, the raw pang of hunger, the mindless urge to procreate. This ancient brain doesn't feel affection or longing. It feels a drive, a need, a compulsion. It is powerful and essential, the bedrock of our survival. For eons, this was enough. But as our ancestors evolved, a new and magnificent addition was built upon this old foundation. Slowly, layer by layer, like a new world forming in the heavens, the neocortex began to grow. This is the great, wrinkled outer layer of the brain, the seat of our higher consciousness. If the old brain is the engine room, the cortex is the observatory, the library, and the artist's studio, all in one. This new brain tissue gave our ancestors incredible new gifts. It gave them the ability to remember the past, not just as a warning, but as a story. It allowed them to imagine the future, to plan, to innovate, and to dream. And most importantly for our story, it gave them the power of self-awareness. It allowed them to have a feeling, and to know they were having it. This is where the magic happens. This new, thoughtful brain began to intercept the raw, powerful signals coming up from the ancient engine room and interpret them. It took the frantic, energetic signal of dopamine, that primal, I want it, and began to weave a story around it. It was no longer just a faceless urge. The new brain could attach it to the specific memory of how a person's eyes crinkled when they laughed, or the unique sound of their voice. The raw, chemical drive to get something valuable was filtered through memory and imagination. and it was transformed into something far more nuanced longing. It became the desire not just for a reward, but for the presence of a specific, irreplaceable individual. It did the same with the other chemicals. It took the calm, reassuring signal of oxytocin, that feeling of safety and contentment, and gave it a name and a meaning. The simple, animal comfort of huddling together for warmth was elevated. The new brain could reflect on this feeling, recognize it, and cherish it. The feeling of "this is safe" became "I trust you." The contentment of a shared meal became "I feel at home with you." The raw chemistry of bonding was transformed into the recognizable emotions of affection, tenderness, and trust. And the steady, loyal signal of vasopressin, the instinct to guard and protect, was also given a new, more profound meaning. An animal guards its territory out of pure instinct. But the new human brain could turn that instinct into a conscious choice. It could understand the concept of a promise, of a future. The raw protective drive was no longer just an impulse. It became the foundation for loyalty, commitment, and devotion. It was the choice to stand by someone, not just because your chemistry told you to, but because you had woven a story of a shared life together. This was the dawn of our inner world. Our ancestors were now living in a world of color and complexity that their predecessors could never have imagined. They were no longer just puppets of their chemistry. They were becoming the poets of it. They could now experience the uniquely human ache of missing someone, the quiet joy of shared understanding, the fierce pride of loyalty. The feelings themselves may have been born in the ancient engine room, but it was in the new, sunlit chambers of the cortex that they were given a voice, a name, and a soul. The journey of love was no longer just about the survival of our genes. It had become about the connection between two minds, two stories, intertwined. This intricate system, this dance of chemicals, and the new, feeling mind, is a masterpiece of evolution. But nature is not an artist for art's sake. It is a pragmatic engineer. Every adaptation, every new trait, must pay its way by offering a tangible advantage for survival. So we must ask the question, why love? What problem was this incredibly powerful emotion designed to solve? The answer lies not with the adults, but with the single most vulnerable and precious thing in their world, a human child. To see the problem clearly, picture a newborn foal. Within an hour of its birth, it can stand on its own wobbly legs. Within a day, it can run with the herd. Now, picture a newborn human. It is, by comparison, completely and utterly helpless. It cannot cling to its mother's back like a baby chimpanzee. It cannot walk. It cannot even lift its own head. For years, a human child remains profoundly dependent on its caregivers for food, for warmth, for protection from the slightest of dangers. This prolonged period of helplessness is one of the defining traits of our species, and it presented our ancestors with a profound evolutionary challenge. This vulnerability was a direct trade-off for our greatest gift, our large brain. As our ancestors began to walk upright, their bodies changed. Bipedalism required a narrower pelvis to make walking and running more efficient. But this created a conflict, an evolutionary puzzle known as the obstetrical dilemma. A large brain species needed a wide birth canal, but an efficient bipedal species needed a narrow one. Nature's solution was a compromise. Human babies would be born at a much earlier stage of development, while their heads were still small enough to pass through the mother's restructured pelvis. They would complete their brain growth outside the womb. In essence, a human baby is born premature. its first year of life like a fourth trimester that other mammals complete safely inside their mother. This placed an almost impossible burden on the ancestral mother. Imagine her situation. She must care for an infant that requires constant attention. She must carry it everywhere, nurse it, and protect it. How can she do all of this? And also gather enough food for herself and her child? How can she defend them both from a lurking predator alone? Her chances, and the chances of her child surviving to adulthood, were perilously slim. The energy cost, the risk, the sheer logistical challenge was immense. The human species was facing an evolutionary crisis. The very thing that made us special, our big brain, was making it incredibly difficult for us to survive our own infancy. And this is where love steps onto the stage, not as a poetic luxury, but as the ultimate survival mechanism. This is where the pair bond became humanity's superpower. A male who was chemically and emotionally bonded to the female who felt the steady, loyal pull of vasopressin and the trusting warmth of oxytocin was a male who would stick around. He wasn't just a fleeting partner. He became a co-parent. And a two-parent team changed the entire equation of survival. With a bonded partner, the mother was no longer alone. The male could take on the dangerous, energy-intensive task of hunting, providing a crucial supply of protein and fat that the mother and child desperately needed. He could be the guardian, standing watch through the night, his protective instincts on high alert, allowing the mother and infant to rest safely. The crushing burden of survival was now shared. The male provided, the female nurtured. It was a division of labor born not of social rules, but of biological necessity, and it was held together by the powerful, invisible glue of their emotional bond. This bond did more than just provide food and safety. It created a stable learning environment. A human child has a staggering amount to learn how to find food, how to make tools, how to understand the complex social rules of the clan. With two dedicated parents, the child's education was doubled. It could learn the arts of tracking and hunting from its father, and the knowledge of edible plants and medicine from its mother. The pair bond created the first school, the first safe and stable classroom for the transmission of culture. So, the advantage becomes crystal clear. An infant raised by two bonded, cooperating parents had a dramatically higher chance of surviving its long, vulnerable childhood. And a child that survives is a child that can pass on its genes. Natural selection began to fiercely favor the traits that made this possible. It favored the chemistry of connection. It favored the brain that could form lasting attachments. It favored the emotion we call love. Love was nature's brilliant solution to the problem of our own biology. It is the soft, emotional answer to a hard, evolutionary question. It is the force that ensured our survival, allowing our big-brained, helpless babies to grow up, generation after generation, until they could eventually build cities and write poems about the very feeling that got them there. Love wasn't just a feeling, it was the engine of our continuity. It's the reason every single one of us is here today. To truly appreciate the path we have walked, it is sometimes helpful to look at the paths not taken. The story of our evolution is a story of branching roads, of choices made by nature and circumstance millions of years ago. And while the ancestors who took those other roads are long gone, we can see a faint reflection of their worlds in our closest living cousins, the great apes. By observing their lives, we don't see our past, but rather a different version of the present, a different answer to the question of how to live. It is in this comparison that the uniqueness of human love truly shines. First, Let us turn our gaze to the chimpanzees. For a long time, we saw them as our nearest mirrors. Their world is a complex and often turbulent society, built on power, politics, and shifting alliances. It is a world largely dominated by males, where status is everything. A male chimpanzee's life is a constant effort to climb the social ladder, to form coalitions, to challenge the alpha, and to hold on to power. It is a life of intense social calculation, and their bonds reflect this. Mating in a chimpanzee troop is largely promiscuous. While a high-ranking male may try to monopolize access to females, long-term, exclusive romantic bonds are not the norm. Mating is often opportunistic, a matter of strategy or a temporary privilege of power. Friendships and alliances are certainly powerful forces, but the central, organizing principle of their society is not the mated pair. And when a baby chimpanzee is born, the responsibility for its care falls almost entirely on its mother. She is a devoted and brilliant parent, caring, nursing, and protecting her infant for years. The father's role is indirect at best. He contributes by helping to defend the territory of the entire group. But he does not recognize a specific child as his own. He does not bring the mother food. He does not form a family unit with her. Theirs is a world held together by a web of male ambition and maternal devotion, but the focused, cooperative partnership of human parents is nowhere to be seen. Now, let us travel to a different forest, to the world of the bonobos. They are as closely related to us as chimpanzees are, yet their society offers a profoundly different vision. If the chimpanzee world is one of patriarchal politics, the bonobo world is one of matriarchal peace. Their society is female-centered and remarkably egalitarian. Where chimpanzees resolve tension with aggression, bonobos resolve it with affection. They are famous for using social sexual contact as a form of social glue. For bonobos, physical intimacy is like a handshake, a hug, a way to say hello, to make up after a squabble, or to share in the excitement of finding food. Their approach to mating, therefore, is also very different from our own. It is detached from the jealousy, possession, and intense focus that often characterize human romance. The idea of an exclusive, long-term pair bond is largely absent. Connection is diffused throughout the group, a web of pleasure and appeasement that keeps the peace. And like with chimpanzees, the primary caregiver for the young is the mother, who raises her offspring with the support of the other females in her close-knit community. The bonobos found a different solution to the problem of social cohesion, one built not on the intensity of the pair, but on the fluid harmony of the collective. So we have two alternate worlds, one built on male power dynamics, the other on female social harmony. In both, we see things we recognize: the fierce love of a mother, the loyalty of friends, the capacity for grief and joy. Yet that central, organizing principle of so many human societies, the enduring, romantic pair bond that creates a stable unit for raising children, is a quiet note in their loud and complex symphonies. And this is what makes our own path so extraordinary. Sometime in our deep past, our ancestors diverged. We did not take the road of the chimpanzee or the bonobo. Faced with the unique challenge of our incredibly helpless infants, we stumbled upon a new social technology. We stumbled upon romantic love. We evolved the capacity to focus our intense bonding chemistry onto a single partner for a very long time. And critically, we evolved the concept of fatherhood, the recognition by a male of his own offspring, and a profound, chemically driven instinct to protect and provide for them. This isn't to say that our way is inherently better. It is simply our way. It was our unique solution to our unique problem. The human heart, capable of such focused, long-term, and passionate attachment, is an evolutionary masterpiece, forged in the specific crucible of our own history. We still carry the echoes of our cousins within us. Of course, we can see the shadows of chimpanzee politics in our own power struggles, and the spirit of bonobo peacemaking in our desire for community. But the bedrock of our story, the foundation upon which countless generations have been built, is the quiet miracle of the pair bond. It is the story of two individuals turning to face each other, and in doing so, creating the future. So, we have the potent chemical recipe for a bond. We have the conscious mind, capable of turning that chemistry into profound feeling. And we have the relentless evolutionary pressure of a long and helpless childhood, making that bond a ticket to survival. When you pour all of these powerful ingredients into the crucible of the prehistoric world, what is the result? What new and revolutionary structure is forged? The answer is something so familiar to us that we often forget it had to be invented at all. The answer is family. This was something new under the sun. It was far more than just a mating pair. It was an economic unit, a social sanctuary, and an emotional stronghold, all in one. Let's return to the image of the campfire, that small circle of light against the immense darkness. This fire is now the heart of a home. It is the center of this new entity, the family. It is here that the day's resources are pooled, where the children are watched over, and where the first true division of labor based on partnership begins. Imagine the balance of this partnership. The male, often focused on hunting, would venture out, sometimes for days at a time. His work was high risk, but brought a high reward meat, a dense and precious source of calories, fat, and protein essential for growing a large brain. Meanwhile, the female, often staying closer to the camp with a dependent child, was the master of a different economy. She was the gatherer, the expert botanist who knew which roots were safe, which berries were sweet, which leaves could soothe a fever. Her work was lower risk and provided the steady, reliable bulk of the group's diet. It is crucial to see this not as a hierarchy, but as a partnership of profound mutual dependence. His success meant a feast. Her success meant they wouldn't starve between the feasts. His strength protected them from predators. Her knowledge protected them from poison. Their skills were not identical. They were complementary. They were two halves of a single, functioning survival unit. And the glue holding it all together was the enduring emotional bond they shared. Their love was not a luxury. It was the operating system for their shared life. This stable unit created the very first concept of a home. A home is not just a place. It is not just a cave or a temporary shelter. A home is a center of gravity. It's the place you return to. It's the nexus of safety, of trust, of belonging. It was here, in the context of the family, that a child could grow with a sense of stability and predictability in a wildly unpredictable world. It was here that food was reliably shared. It was here that the day's stories were told. And it was here that the long, slow process of education took place, passing down the essential survival skills from one generation to the next. But this core unit, this bonded pair, and their offspring did not exist in a vacuum. It was the central building block of a much larger structure, the clan. Picture several of these family fires burning within sight of each other, forming a small village or a band. This was a community of families. The bond of love that formed the core of one family became the model for the cooperative bonds that held the entire clan together. The children were raised not just by their parents, but by a network of aunts, uncles, and cousins. The success of one family's hunt was often shared among the others, creating a prehistoric social safety net. And with this, the idea of kinship was born. This was a truly revolutionary social technology. Life was no longer just a collection of individuals. It was now an intricate web of recognized relationships: parent, child, sibling, cousin, grandparent. These relationships came with a set of unspoken rules, of obligations and expectations. You had a special duty to your kin. You helped them, defended them, and mourned them. This web of kinship was the blueprint for all human societies to come. It allowed for a level of social organization and cooperation that was previously unimaginable. So the family, born of love and necessity, was perhaps our species' greatest invention. It was our first school, teaching the lessons of survival. It was our first hospital, caring for the sick and injured. It was our first government, establishing a system of rules and mutual obligations. It was the safe harbor that allowed our ancestors to do more than just survive the harshness of their world. It gave them the stability and security needed to thrive, to innovate, and for culture itself to blossom. The delicate feelings shared between two individuals became the bedrock upon which the entire human world would be built. We have built our family unit, this core of human connection. But we cannot leave it sitting in an abstract, timeless space. We must place it into the world it inhabited. And for almost the entirety of human history, that world was one of constant, rhythmic movement. We now enter the Paleolithic, the Old Stone Age, an era that lasted for more than 2 million years, a chapter so vast it makes all of recorded history look like a single, hurried sentence at the end of a very long book. To understand love in this age, we must first understand that it was a love on the move. This was not a life of aimless wandering. The people of the Paleolithic were not lost. They were following a deep and ancient rhythm, a pattern known as the seasonal round. Their lives were an endless pilgrimage, dictated by the turning of the earth and the migrations of the great beasts they depended on. Imagine them in the spring, moving down from the sheltered valleys into the lowlands, following the herds of deer and wild horses that were drawn to the new grass. In the summer, they might journey to a specific coastline their people had visited for generations to feast on shellfish and seabirds. In the autumn, they would travel to the forest to gather nuts and berries, and in the winter, they would retreat to a familiar, sheltered cave system to wait out the cold. Their world was not measured in square miles of owned land, but in the long, winding paths of this seasonal journey. And in such a world, you can only have what you can carry. This applied to their few physical possessions: a stone axe, a fur cloak, a shell necklace, but it also applied to their emotional lives. Their love, their bonds, their family structure had to be as flexible and portable as everything else they owned. There were no permanent houses to return to, no fields to tie them to one place. Their home was not a structure, it was the family unit itself, a portable sanctuary that they carried with them across the vast and changing landscape. This constant movement fostered a profound and intimate relationship with the land itself. The landscape was not just a backdrop for their lives, It was a third partner in every relationship, a silent witness to every story. A bonded pair would share a mental map of their territory that was rich with memory and meaning. Their love story would be written across the face of the earth. Imagine a conversation between them, spoken or unspoken. "Here's the ridge where the sky is biggest, where we watched the mammoths pass last year. This is the stream where you found that smooth, cool stone I still carry. Under this rock overhang is where we took shelter from that terrifying storm, and where our first child took his first steps." Their shared past was not a collection of dates, but a map of places. The land held their history, and their bond was reinforced with every step of their shared journey. Of course, this life in motion was filled with peril. Every day presented a new set of challenges. A sudden blizzard could trap them in the open. A crucial hunt could fail, leaving them hungry for days. A chance encounter with a cave lion or a pack of wolves could mean the difference between life and death. These constant shared struggles would have forged bonds of incredible strength. The abstract idea of trust becomes something real and immediate when you are depending on your partner to watch your back while you butcher a kill, or to find the right healing plant for a wound. In this world, there was little room for prolonged conflict within the family. A disagreement between a couple had to be resolved quickly, because that night you might need them to help you defend the camp. Your survival, and the survival of your children, depended entirely on your ability to function as a seamless, cooperative team. This daily dance with danger would have stripped their relationships down to their essential core, a deep, practical, and powerful reliance on one another. It was a love tested by hardship, strengthened by shared fear, and rewarded with the simple, profound gift of seeing the sunrise on another day together. It was not a love of leisure and comfort. It was a love that knew how to walk, how to endure, and how to find its home not in a place, but in the steadfast presence of another person. In a life of constant motion, across a vast and often intimidating landscape, there was one anchor, one point of return. As the sun bled out across the horizon, casting long shadows from ancient trees, all eyes would turn to a single, growing point of light. The campfire. It was so much more than just a tool for warmth or cooking. For the people of the Paleolithic, the fire was the living, breathing heart of their world. It was the center of their community, their shield against the darkness, and the crucible in which their bonds were forged and strengthened daily. Imagine the world they inhabited, a world without any other source of light but the moon and stars. The night was an immense, black ocean, filled with the unseen rustles and calls of nocturnal predators. The fire created a small, sacred island of light and warmth in the middle of that ocean. To be inside the circle of its glow was to be safe. To be outside it was to be vulnerable. This simple, stark reality created a powerful psychological boundary. The firelight defined their world, drawing the clan together, shoulder to shoulder, in a shared space of security. The feeling of collective safety, of being sheltered together from the vast, unknowable darkness, was a powerful bonding agent, reinforcing their identity as a group, as a single entity against the wild. The fire was their kitchen, the first great dining room. The air around it would be thick with the sounds and smells that define their lives, the crackle of dry wood, the hiss of fat dripping from meat onto the hot stones, the savory aroma of a successful hunt. The act of sharing food is one of the most fundamental bonding rituals of our species, and it was here that it was born. The hunter would bring his prize back to the fire, and the food would be prepared and distributed, often according to complex social rules. This was not just about feeding bodies. It was about reinforcing the social fabric. It was a daily reaffirmation of the partnership at the heart of the family, the provider bringing the kill, the preparer transforming it into a meal, and a demonstration of the cooperative spirit of the entire clan. As the flames danced, casting flickering, exaggerated shadows on the walls of a cave or the trunks of trees, the fire became their first theater. This was where the day was lived a second time, through stories. A hunter wouldn't just say he saw a deer. He would become the deer, mimicking its cautious movements. And then he would become himself, reenacting the patient stalk, the tense drawing of the spear, the final, decisive moment. This was not mere entertainment. This was a vital transfer of knowledge, a lesson in tracking for the young boys watching with wide eyes. It was also where bonds were performed. A story of a shared, dangerous encounter would strengthen the connection between the participants, their shared bravery celebrated by the group. Laughter, a shared joke, a moment of collective grief for a lost member, all of it happened here, by the light of the flames. It was in the long, quiet hours around the fire that our most human traits likely found their voice. It was the perfect incubator for complex language. The practical business of the day was done. Now was the time for more than just grunts and warning calls. Now was the time for conversation, for reflection. It was a time to plan tomorrow's hunt, to debate the meaning of a strange cloud formation, to gossip, to complain, to comfort. In these moments of communal grooming, language would have been stretched and shaped, growing more nuanced and complex, allowing for the expression of equally complex emotions. It was here that they could begin to put words, however simple, to the feelings of affection, loyalty, and love that bound them together. This was the birthplace of culture, where the first myths were whispered and the identity of the clan was woven from shared stories. And within this public square, private moments unfolded. The firelight was a shared space, but it also provided a kind of cover. A bonded pair could sit slightly apart from the main group, their shoulders touching, sharing a quiet understanding in a single look. A mother could nurse her child in the warm, gentle glow, murmuring soft sounds that were the ancestors of our lullabies. Children would drift off to sleep, not in a silent, solitary room, but wrapped in the comforting murmur of adult voices, the safest sound in the world. The fire was the backdrop for both the life of the clan and the intimate life of the family. So you see, the campfire was never just burning wood. It was the fortress that kept the monsters of the night at bay. It was the kitchen that turned a hunt into a meal. It was the stage where their lives became stories. It was the school where the young learned the ways of the world. It was the warm, beating heart of the clan and the gentle, nurturing hearth of the family. It was the first, and perhaps the most perfect, definition of home. For much of our journey, we have been walking through a world reconstructed from logic. We infer the strength of bonds from the needs of a helpless child. We imagine the warmth of the fire from the necessity of surviving the cold. But every now and then, the archaeologist's trowel lifts a curtain, and we are confronted not with an idea, but with a person. To find this person, we must travel to a cave nestled in the mountains of what is now Iraq. For tens of thousands of years, this place, Shanidar Cave, was a home, a workshop, and a final resting place for our ancient cousins, the Neanderthals. And in the 1950s, as scientists carefully brushed away the dust of 60,000 years, a story of incredible power began to emerge. They found the remains of several individuals, but one, in particular, demands our attention. He is known to science as Shanidar I, but let's call him by the name the excavators gave him, Nandi. As they pieced together his skeleton, a portrait of a life of incredible hardship began to form. Nandi was old for his time, perhaps reaching the age of 40 or even 50. In a world where life was often short and brutal, he was a survivor, a true elder. But the story his bones told was not one of strength, but of profound infirmity. At some point in his life, he had suffered a crushing blow to the left side of his face. The fracture was so severe, it would have almost certainly blinded him in his left eye. The injury may even have caused partial paralysis on the right side of his body. His right arm was withered and useless, the bones of the lower arm and hand missing entirely. Whether this was from a birth defect or an amputation early in life, we don't know. But we know he navigated his world with only one functional arm. To make matters worse, his feet were riddled with arthritis, the bones deformed by a life of hard walking. He would have been in constant pain, and he would have walked with a slow, agonizing limp. Now, we must stop and ask a simple, piercing question. How does a one-eyed, one-armed man with a painful limp survive in the world of the Ice Age? How does he hunt mammoths and woolly rhinos? How does he flee from a cave lion or fend off a pack of hyenas? How does he keep up with his clan as they make their seasonal journey across the rugged mountain landscape? The blunt and obvious answer is that he couldn't. Not alone. The very existence of Nandi into old age is a stunning, irrefutable testament to the existence of something beyond mere survival of the fittest. For him to have lived so long, he must have been cared for. This was not a single act of kindness. This was a lifetime of support. When he was too slow to hunt, someone must have shared their kill with him. When his vision failed him, someone must have guided his steps. When predators closed in, someone must have stood with him, defending him. For years, for decades, his clan chose to feed him, to protect him, and to help him, carrying him as a precious member, not a burden. This goes far beyond the cold calculus of survival. Nandi was not a practical asset to his group in a physical sense. They kept him alive for other reasons. They kept him alive because he mattered. We can only guess at why. Perhaps, as an elder, he was a great storyteller, the keeper of the clan's myths and history. Perhaps he was a master toolmaker, able to sit by the fire and craft the finest stone points with his one good hand. Or perhaps, and this is the most beautiful thought of all, they cared for him simply because they loved him, because he was their brother, their father, their friend. His survival is silent, fossilized proof of compassion, of empathy, of a bond that transcended utility. And there is more. Not far from Nandi, the archaeologists found another individual, Shanidar IV. When the soil around his skeleton was first analyzed, it was found to contain large clumps of pollen from several different types of colorful wildflowers. This led to the wonderfully poetic and romantic theory of the flower burial. The idea that this Neanderthal had not just been buried, but laid to rest on a bed of flowers, a final, tender act of grief and remembrance from his family. Now, modern science has revisited this idea. Some scientists now argue that the pollen could have been brought into the cave by burrowing rodents, and that the flower burial might be a beautiful myth. But whether the flowers were placed there by a grieving hand or a scurrying animal doesn't diminish the power of the central truth that Shanidar gives us. The truth, written in the healed and broken bones of Nandi, is that our capacity for care is ancient. The instinct to look after those we love, to protect the weak, to value a person for more than just their physical strength, this is not a new invention. It is not a feature of so-called civilization. It is a part of our shared human heritage, a quality that burned just as brightly in the heart of a Neanderthal clan 60,000 years ago as it does in our own. The silent bones of Shanidar Cave are a message across the millennia, telling us that in the harshest of worlds, the first instinct of our ancestors was often to love. The evidence of Shanidar Cave shows us love is a long, patient verb, an act of sustained care over many years. But sometimes the past leaves us a different kind of message. Sometimes it shows us love as a single, poignant snapshot, a feeling frozen in a moment. To find this message, we must journey forward in time, to the Neolithic period, the New Stone Age. The world is warming, humanity is learning to farm, and villages are beginning to appear. And in one of these villages, near the modern-day city of Mantua in Italy, a promise was made, and buried, and kept secret for 6,000 years. The year is 2007. A team of archaeologists is carefully excavating the site of an ancient settlement. The work is slow, patient, a meticulous search for fragments of pottery and stone tools. Then, one of the archaeologists calls out. The lead excavator, a woman named Elena Maria Minotti, comes over to look. As she carefully brushes away the soil, the outline of something extraordinary appears. Not a pot, not a tool, but two human skeletons, tangled together. As they cleared more earth, a collective hush fell over the team. These two were not just buried near each other. They were locked in a final, tender embrace. Imagine the sight. Two young people lying on their sides, facing one another. Their arms are wrapped around each other. Their legs are intertwined. Their faces, their bare skulls, are so close they almost touch, as if whispering a secret to one another that has lasted for 6 millennia. This was not the accidental result of a collapsing grave. This was deliberate. This was their final pose. This is how their community, their family, chose to lay them to rest. They have become known to the world by a simple, perfect name, the lovers of Valdaro. What do the bones tell us of their lives? They tell us they were young, tragically young. Neither was likely older than 20. They were on the very threshold of their adult lives. Their skeletons show no signs of violence. There are no cuts, no broken bones from a battle. They were not victims of a murder or a sacrifice. The most likely theory is that they died together, perhaps on a cold night, huddled together for warmth and simply never waking up, or struck down together by a sudden, swift illness. But the real story is not in how they died. It is in how they were buried. In a world where life was a constant struggle, a proper burial took time and energy. It would have been far easier to place them in separate graves, or even side by side. To arrange them like this, to carefully position their limbs into an eternal embrace, was a profound act of art and intention. It was a statement made by the living on behalf of the dead. It was a message to the gods, to the spirits, to whatever comes next. It was a plea and a declaration these two were one. Do not separate them in death, for they were inseparable in life. This burial is a testament not just to the love that this young couple shared, but to how that love was seen and valued by their community. Their family and friends saw their bond, recognized its power, and chose to honor it in the most beautiful and permanent way they knew how. In a time of hardship and uncertainty, in the midst of the daily grind of survival, this community paused. They paused to create a monument, not a monument to a great hunter or a powerful chieftain, but to the quiet, powerful force of love between two young people. It tells us that even 6,000 years ago, love was something to be celebrated, to be honored, and to be preserved against the ravages of time. The lovers of Valdaro are a silent poem written in bone. They lie there still, now protected in a museum, their embrace unbroken. They offer a profound contrast to the grand tombs of kings and emperors that would come later in history. Those tombs speak of power, of wealth, of conquest. The lovers speak of none of that. They speak only of a feeling, of the universal, human desire to hold and be held, to find a home in the arms of another. They are a 6,000-year-old love letter, reminding us that the need to connect, to cherish, and to face the great unknown together is one of the oldest and most essential parts of who we are. They are not just two skeletons. They are a promise, kept for eternity. The past does not always speak in clear narratives. The embrace of the lovers of Valdaro is a straightforward story. The bones of Shani Darwan tell a tale of compassion. But sometimes, our ancestors left us not a story, but a mystery. An object so enigmatic that it asks far more questions than it answers. Among the most beautiful and perplexing of these objects are the small, powerful statues known to us as the Venus figurines. They are some of the very first expressions of the human artistic spirit, and they force us to wonder, what did our ancestors see when they looked at the human body? For tens of thousands of years, across a vast territory, from the shores of the Atlantic to the frozen plains of Siberia, our Paleolithic ancestors carved and molded these small, handheld figures. They are instantly recognizable. They are almost always female, and they almost always share the same striking features. Their breasts are large and heavy. Their stomachs are soft and rounded. Their hips, thighs, and buttocks are wide and exaggerated. Yet their other features are often minimized or absent entirely. Their arms are thin and spindly, often resting atop the breasts. Their legs taper down to small, unfinished feet, and most mysteriously, they rarely have a face. The head is often just a simple, featureless knob, or it might be covered in an intricate pattern that could be hair or a woven cap. The most famous of these is the Venus of Willendorf, a tiny, 4-inch statue carved from limestone nearly 30,000 years ago. She fits perfectly in the palm of a hand, and she is the archetypal example of faceless woman with a large, nurturing body. For over a century, archaeologists and art historians have stared at this little figure and asked a simple question: what does she mean? The oldest and most common interpretation is that she, and the hundreds of other figurines like her, are symbols of fertility and motherhood. In a world where life was precarious, the ability to have children was the single most important guarantee of the future. But childbirth was dangerous, and infant mortality was high. These figurines, with their emphasized reproductive parts, may have been powerful charms, religious icons held during labor, or used in rituals to pray for a successful birth. They could be the image of a mother goddess, an embodiment of nature's endless creativity. This is a vision of love, directed not at a single person, but at the great, mysterious force of life itself. It is a prayer for survival and continuity, a symbol of a mother's love and the sacred power of creation. But there are other ways to see them. Could they be something more personal, more intimate? Some have suggested they could be a form of prehistoric erotica, an expression of what our ancestors found beautiful or desirable. In a world of frequent scarcity and hardship, a well-nourished body with ample fat reserves was a sign of health, success, and status. It was a body that could survive a long winter. It was a body that could successfully carry a child to term. So perhaps these figurines are a celebration of that ideal. A symbol not just of motherhood, but of a lover's desire. A tribute to the female form as a source of not just life, but of pleasure and attraction. More recently, a fascinating and revolutionary new theory has emerged, one that flips the entire perspective. Two researchers, McDermott and McCoyd, asked a simple question: what if these figures were not made by men, looking at women? What if they were made by women, looking at themselves? Imagine a pregnant woman sitting down to carve her own image. She looks down at her body. What does she see? She sees her large breasts and her swelling belly dominating her field of vision. Her own head and face are out of sight, and when she looks down past her stomach, her legs and feet appear shortened and tapered by the perspective. The proportions of the Venus figurines, which seem so strange to us, are the exact proportions of a woman's own view of her body. This idea is breathtaking. It reframes these objects from things to be looked at into acts of self-expression. They could be the very first self-portraits. They could be a way for women to understand and document the incredible changes happening to their own bodies during pregnancy. They become objects not of a man's desire, but of a woman's own experience, her own identity. So what is the truth? Are they sacred goddesses, sensual love objects, or intimate self-portraits? The beauty of the mystery is that they could be all of these things, sometimes all at once. A single figurine could have been carved by a woman as a reflection of herself, then used by her as a charm for a safe birth, and admired by her partner as a thing of beauty. Their meaning is not fixed. It is as complex and layered as we are. What these figurines tell us, for certain, is that for our deep ancestors, the female body was a source of immense power and fascination. It was the vessel of life, the object of desire, the symbol of security and continuity. They are a tangible link, a 30,000-year-old connection to the way our ancestors thought about the great themes of existence. Whether they represent a mother's love, a lover's desire, or a woman's quiet contemplation of herself, they are powerful icons of the feminine energy that sits at the very heart of the human story. For all the power of a small, handheld object like a Venus figurine, there is another kind of art our ancestors left behind. Art on a monumental scale, hidden away from the sun, deep in the belly of the earth. To experience it, we must imagine ourselves leaving the familiar world of the plains and the forests and entering a different realm. With a flickering animal fat lamp in hand, we squeeze through a narrow opening in a limestone cliff and descend into the absolute darkness and profound silence of a cave. We are entering a sacred space, a cathedral. We are walking into the caves of Lascaux, of Chauvet, of Altamira. The journey inward is part of the experience. The air grows cool and still. The only sound is your own breath and the soft padding of your feet on the cave floor. Then, as you raise your flickering lamp, the walls explode into life. Great, thundering herds of bison, their shoulders heavy with muscle. Graceful, wild horses, their manes seeming to fly in the unsteady light. Majestic stags with vast, intricate antlers. And, in the oldest caves, like Chauvet, a fearsome collection of predators, cave lions, panthers, and bears, their eyes seeming to glint with intelligence. The artists were masters of their craft, using the natural bulges and curves of the rock to give their creations a breathtaking, three-dimensional life. In the dancing, uncertain light of the lamps, the animals would have appeared to move, to breathe, to gallop across the stone. For a long time, The prevailing theory was that this was all about the hunt, that these paintings were a form of sympathetic magic. By painting an animal, and perhaps by painting a spear striking its side, the hunter gained a mystical power over its spirit, ensuring success in the dangerous work of acquiring food. This hunting magic theory is powerful, and it certainly explains some of what we see. But it may not be the whole story. It is perhaps too simple, too practical to explain the sheer majesty and complexity of this art. When we look closer, questions arise. The animals painted with the most care and frequency were often not the ones the people ate most often. And many of the animals show no signs of being hunted at all. They are simply presented in all their natural glory. Could this art, created in such special, hidden places, be about more than just dinner? Could it be that we have been so focused on the magnificent animals that we have missed the human story hiding in plain sight? Look closer at the walls. Here and there, you will find a different kind of image, a handprint. An artist would place their hand flat against the rock and blow a fine powder of red ochre or black manganese over it, leaving behind a perfect negative stencil. These are the oldest signatures in the world. A direct, personal touch reaching out across 30,000 years. It is a powerful, haunting declaration. I was here, I existed. Whose hands were they? Studies suggest they belong to men, to women, and even to children. They are the hands of the whole community, leaving their mark in this sacred place. And what of the people themselves? Human figures are rare in cave art, and when they do appear, they are strangely simplistic, often drawn as mere stick figures next to the brilliantly realistic animals. One of the most famous and enigmatic scenes on Earth is in a deep shaft at Lascaux. It shows a great bison, its side pierced by a spear, its entrails spilling out. Before it lies a bird-headed man, stick-like and seemingly falling. Is this a depiction of a real hunting accident? Is it the record of a shaman's vision? A spiritual journey into the animal world? We will never know for sure. But one thing is clear. It is a narrative. It is a story with characters, with action, with drama, and perhaps the great animal herds themselves tell a human story. Perhaps a parade of horses represents the clan, moving together across the plains. Perhaps a male and female bison, painted close together, are a symbol of a powerful, lasting bond. Perhaps the intricate patterns of dots and lines that accompany the animals are not random decorations, but lunar calendars, tracking the passage of time, or even the cycles of a pregnancy. The art may be a complex, symbolic language, a way of mapping their social world and their place in the cosmos. The great painted caves were not just art galleries. They were the heart of our ancestors' spiritual world. They were the place they went to tell their most important stories, to perform their most sacred rituals, to try and make sense of the mysteries of life, death, and nature. And while the thundering animals capture our gaze, the human presence is everywhere. It is in the hand that held the lamp, in the breath that blew the pigment against the wall, and in the shared wonder that must have filled these dark, echoing chambers. In these first cathedrals, our ancestors celebrated the whole, rich tapestry of their lives, a story in which the bonds of love, of family, and of community must have been one of the most sacred tales of all. We have explored the grand themes of love, the long-term care, the communal bonds, the spiritual art. But all of these things often begin with something much smaller and more immediate. A spark, a glance, a sudden, inexplicable pull toward another person. Attraction. It can feel like the most mysterious and personal magic in the world. But what if the rules of that magic were written down long ago, in the ancient language of survival? What was beautiful in a world where a poor choice of partner could mean the difference between life and death? It's tempting to think of beauty as a modern luxury, something fickle and subjective. But in the world of our ancestors, beauty was a language. It was a collection of honest signals, a quick and reliable way to assess the health, fertility, and genetic quality of a potential mate. Our modern brains are still running on this ancient software. The things we find attractive today are often the echoes of what signaled a good survival choice by a Paleolithic campfire. Let's start with one of the most universal signals of beauty: symmetry. A face or a body that is balanced and symmetrical is perceived as beautiful across almost all human cultures. The reason is simple and profound. In nature, symmetry is a sign of a steady and healthy development. It indicates that an individual grew up free from major diseases, parasites, or malnutrition that might have disrupted their growth. A symmetrical face was an honest advertisement that said, "I have good genes and a strong immune system." It was a quiet, visual promise of a healthy partner and, therefore, healthy children. Of course, the signals of beauty were not always identical for men and women, because the evolutionary challenges they faced were slightly different. For a male looking for a female partner, the primary unconscious goal was fertility. He needed to find a partner who could successfully conceive and carry a child. Therefore, the features that signaled youth and high fertility became coded in the male brain as beautiful. Clear, smooth skin was a sign of health and lack of disease. Full lips and bright eyes were signs of youth and high estrogen levels. And a certain waist-to-hip ratio, a curvy figure, was a reliable indicator that a woman was of childbearing age and had the necessary fat reserves to sustain a pregnancy. The Venus figurines, in their own exaggerated way, can be seen as a monument to these powerful, attractive signals of life-giving potential. For a female assessing a male partner, the calculus was different. Her great challenge was to see her helpless infant through its long childhood. She needed a partner who was not only healthy, but who could also be a good provider and protector. Therefore, the features that signaled strength and resourcefulness became coded as attractive. Height and broad shoulders were honest signals of strength and prowess as a hunter and defender. A strong jawline was a sign of high testosterone and a robust constitution. Beauty in a male was directly linked to his ability to keep his family safe and fed. But it would be a mistake to think that attraction was only about the physical. Our ancestors were far too socially sophisticated for that. Other, more subtle qualities would have been incredibly beautiful and deeply attractive, perhaps even more so than a symmetrical face or a strong body. Think of skill. A man who was a master at chipping flint into a perfect spear point, or a woman who knew exactly which plants could cure a fever. These skills were enormously valuable. They signaled intelligence, patience, and resourcefulness. Skill was sexy. And what about kindness? In the small, tightly knit world of a hunter-gatherer band, your life depended on the cooperation of others. An individual who was consistently generous, who shared their food freely, who helped care for others' children, who could be counted on in a crisis, that person was a priceless asset to the community. Kindness and altruism were not just nice personality traits. They were honest signals that you would be a reliable, cooperative, and trustworthy long-term partner. The deep attraction we feel to kindness is an ancient instinct. The story of Shanidar the Old, crippled Neanderthal, who was cared for by his clan, tells us that his people were attracted not to his physical ability, but to his spirit, to the person he was. And we can even speculate about the beauty of a sense of humor. The ability to make others laugh, to tell a good story around the campfire, to ease tension after a stressful day. These are signs of high social intelligence. They signal a mind that is creative, resilient, and good at navigating complex social situations. A good laugh might have been one of the most attractive sounds in the prehistoric world. So the rules of attraction are not a shallow, modern invention. They are a deep and ancient script, written by millions of years of evolution to guide us toward partners who would help us survive. The things we still find beautiful today, the glow of health, the reassurance of strength, the elegance of symmetry, the warmth of kindness, and the spark of humor are the very same qualities that would have made a person a good partner by a fire 30,000 years ago. When our heart beats a little faster at the sight of someone, we are, in a very real way, listening to the whispers of our most ancient ancestors. For the vast majority of our story so far, we have spoken of our ancestors as a single, unified group. But the reality of the deep past is more complex and more fascinating. For tens of thousands of years, our species, Homo sapiens, was not the only type of human walking the earth. We had cousins, other branches of the human family tree, who had left our shared African homeland much earlier. The most famous of these are the Neanderthals. And for a long, critical period in our history, we shared the world with them. First, we must shed the old, cartoonish image of the Neanderthal as a brutish, hunched-over ape-man. The real Neanderthals, as revealed by a century of patient archaeology, were a highly successful and intelligent form of human. They were powerfully built, perfectly adapted to the cold, harsh world of Ice Age Europe. They were expert hunters of giant game. They controlled fire, they crafted complex stone tools, and as we saw in Shanidar Cave, they cared for their sick and buried their dead. They were not monsters. They were simply a different kind of humanity. Then, sometime around 45,000 years ago, a new group of humans began to arrive in their European homeland. These were our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, moving out of Africa and into Asia and Europe. For several thousand years, these two distinct human populations lived as neighbors. Imagine the scene. Two different kinds of people, sharing the same valleys, hunting the same herds of bison, watching the smoke from each other's campfires rise into the same sky. What happened in those valleys? What did they think when they first saw each other? For a long time, the prevailing story was one of conflict and replacement. A simple, dramatic tale where the clever, innovative Homo sapiens swept across the land, outcompeting their supposedly dimmer cousins and driving them to extinction. But in the 21st century, a revolution in science allowed us to read a much older and more truthful history book, the one written in our own DNA. When scientists were finally able to sequence the entire Neanderthal genome, they compared it to our own, and they found something that changed our understanding of our own origins forever. They found that nearly everyone alive today whose ancestry comes from outside of Africa carries between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. The implication of this discovery is staggering and inescapable. The story wasn't just one of replacement. At some point, in some forgotten place, our Homo sapiens ancestors and the Neanderthals were not just neighbors. They had children together. They interbred. A part of them never went extinct because it lives on inside of us. So we are left with a profound and intimate question. What were these encounters like? The truth is, we will never fully know. The reality was likely a complex tapestry of many different kinds of interactions. Surely, some of it was hostile. There would have been conflict over resources, tribal warfare, and violent encounters, as there has always been between different groups of humans. But the DNA tells us that something else happened, too. Perhaps some encounters were born of curiosity. Imagine a young Homo sapiens hunter, separated from his group, stumbling upon a Neanderthal camp. He is treated not with aggression, but with caution, and then, perhaps, generosity. They might have traded a beautifully crafted sapiens spear point for a warm and masterfully prepared Neanderthal fur cloak. Perhaps a lone individual, a survivor of a disaster, was adopted into a clan of the other species. And we must allow for the most remarkable possibility of all, the possibility of love. Could a Homo sapiens man and a Neanderthal woman, or vice versa, have looked at each other and felt that ancient spark of attraction? Their ideas of beauty might have been different, but they would have been built on the same foundations. A strong, successful Neanderthal hunter would have been just as attractive as a strong sapiens hunter. The kindness and care they showed their own family would have been just as beautiful to an outsider. Could they have overcome the barriers of language and custom to form a genuine bond? A family, the DNA in our cells whispers that yes. On at least some occasions, this must have happened. The Neanderthals, as a distinct people, eventually vanished from the world around 40,000 years ago, for reasons that are still hotly debated. But they are not entirely gone. Their legacy is written into our very being. The small percentage of their DNA that we carry has been linked to very real traits, affecting things like our immune system's ability to fight off certain viruses and our skin's reaction to sunlight. In a very real way, the gift of these ancient encounters helped our ancestors adapt and survive in a new world. The story of human love, it turns out, is wilder and more inclusive than we ever imagined. It wasn't always confined to our own small group, or even our own species. At the very dawn of our global journey, there were moments of connection that crossed the lines between different kinds of humanity. The Neanderthal in our DNA is a silent, 40,000-year-old locket, a family secret that reminds us our own story is deeper, more complex, and more mysterious than we ever knew. We have painted a beautiful picture of prehistoric love, a story of care, of cooperation, of a partnership that ensured our very survival. But to leave the story, there would be to tell only half the truth. It would be dishonest. For love, in all its power, is not a simple or gentle emotion. It is a fierce, elemental force, and like a fire, it can provide warmth, but it can also burn. Where there is a deep attachment, there is also the profound fear of loss. And this fear has a name: jealousy. To understand the story of love, we must also understand its dark and painful shadow. Jealousy is not a modern invention or a simple character flaw. It is an ancient and powerful emotional program, honed by millions of years of evolution to solve a very specific set of problems. It evolved to protect the most valuable asset a person had: their bond with a trusted partner. But the threats to that bond were slightly different for males and females, and so the jealousy they experienced often took on a different character. From a male's evolutionary perspective, the single greatest threat to his genetic legacy was paternity uncertainty. Unlike the mother, who is always certain the child is hers. The father could never be absolutely sure. Investing years of his energy, his food, and his protection in raising a child that was not his own would be a catastrophic evolutionary failure. And so, evolution installed a powerful and vigilant security system in the male brain, a fierce, possessive jealousy that was acutely sensitive to any sign of sexual infidelity. It was a mate-guarding instinct, a powerful drive to ensure his partner's fidelity and thus the certainty of his own lineage. From a female's perspective, the threat was different. Her great fear was not that her child wasn't hers, but that her partner would abandon her and her child. The greatest danger was the diversion of his resources, his food, his protection, his time, and his commitment to another woman and her offspring. If he formed a deep emotional bond with someone else, her own children's chances of survival would plummet. And so, her jealousy evolved to be a different kind of alarm system, one acutely sensitive to any sign of emotional infidelity. It was a bond-guarding instinct, designed to protect the precious investment of her partner's support and care. Now, imagine these powerful, ancient emotions playing out in the close-knit, intimate world of a Paleolithic clan. In a community of a few dozen people, there are no real secrets. Every interaction is public knowledge. A lingering glance, a shared private joke, a gift of a special piece of meat, all of it would be noticed. And all of it could trigger this deep-seated fear of loss. This could lead to simmering resentment, to arguments that disturb the peace of the camp, and to fractures in the social cohesion that was so vital for their survival. And sometimes, it would have led to violence. While it is difficult to read the cause of conflict in ancient bones, the evidence for prehistoric violence is undeniable. All over the world, archaeologists have found skeletons with skulls crushed by clubs, or with the stone points of spears embedded in their ribs. While much of this was surely warfare between different tribes, it is naive to believe that violence never erupted within the group, and across the entire animal kingdom, including our own species. One of the most powerful triggers for violence is competition over mates. The same powerful bond that inspired a man to protect his family could inspire him to fight a rival to the death. Perhaps the oldest story we have, the biblical tale of Cain and Abel, is a timeless metaphor for this dark side of our nature. It is a story of two brothers, of family. But it is also a story of jealousy, of perceived favoritism, and of a love that becomes so twisted by resentment that it leads to the first murder. This story is so ancient and so powerful because it speaks a fundamental truth about our condition. The lines between love and loyalty, and resentment and violence, are sometimes terrifyingly thin. It is a prehistoric drama that has been reenacted in countless ways, in countless camps and settlements, for all of human history. So we must not imagine the world of our ancestors as a simple paradise of noble savages. Their hearts were as complex and conflicted as our own. The same heart that was capable of the profound compassion we saw at Shanidar was also capable of the searing heat of jealousy. The same hands that could tenderly bury the lovers of Aldaro could also wield a club in a fit of rage. Love is not a gentle, pastoral emotion. It is a powerful, dangerous, and double-edged force of nature. The fear of betrayal and the pain of loss are as much a part of its story as the comfort of an embrace. To truly understand love, we must be willing to look unflinchingly at its shadow, for it is only there, in that interplay of light and dark, that we find its true, and its profoundly human, character. In a world so full of life, death was a constant and intimate presence. Life was shorter, more fragile, and the boundary between existence and oblivion could be crossed in an instant. For millions of years, our earliest ancestors likely treated death as other animals do a simple cessation, the end of a presence. But as the human mind grew more complex, as our capacity for love and memory deepened, a new and profound question must have begun to haunt the firelit nights. Where do we go when we are gone? And the first hints of an answer, the first glimmers of spirituality and hope, are found in the way our ancestors began to treat their dead. The act of burial itself is a revolutionary leap. To take the body of a loved one and deliberately, carefully, place it within the earth is an act full of meaning. It is not just the disposal of remains. It is an act of protection, of sheltering the body one last time. It is an act of remembrance, marking a spot on the earth that will forever be associated with that person. It suggests a new belief that the person, in some form, continues to exist, and that their vessel deserves reverence and care. It is the beginning of goodbye, and sometimes they did not say goodbye to just one. We saw the stunning embrace of the lovers of Valdaro, but their story is not entirely unique. All over the ancient world, archaeologists have found other, similar testaments. Shared graves, double burials, a man and a woman laid to rest together, a mother curled around her child for eternity, two brothers buried side by side with their hunting tools. What do these silent arrangements tell us? We could say, simply, that these people happened to die at the same time. And in a world of plagues and sudden disasters, this was surely sometimes the case. But that doesn't explain the care, the intention, the deliberate positioning. It doesn't explain why they were so often placed together to face the next world as a single unit. A shared grave is a statement. In a life of many connections and alliances, the act of burying two people together declares that this bond, the one they shared with each other, was the most important one of all. It makes their relationship the central theme of their final story. But it is more than just a memorial for the living. It is a provision for the dead. It suggests a belief, or at least a desperate hope, that the journey after death is not one that has to be made alone. To bury a couple together is to try and extend the comfort and protection of their bond into eternity. It is a plea, whispered into the soil. To whatever spirits or gods may be listening, do not let them be lonely. Let them find each other in the darkness. Let them travel together, as they did in this life. It is an attempt to make love stronger than death. We see this hope in the objects they placed in these graves. They didn't just bury their bodies. They buried them with their favorite tools, with their weapons, with ornaments like necklaces of shell and bone. These are not random trinkets. They are grave goods. They are provisions for the journey ahead. They are the things a person might need in the next life. This act is one of profound and enduring love. It is the same impulse that makes us pack a lunch for a child on their first day of school. It is an act of care that reaches beyond the final breath, an attempt to provide for a loved one even after they have left this world entirely. And so, we conclude this long chapter of our story, this journey through the old Stone Age. For 2 million years, our ancestors lived a life of motion, their hearts and minds shaped by the vast, wild world they inhabited. We have seen their capacity for deep care, for breathtaking art, for powerful attraction, and for the searing pain of jealousy. And here, in their graves, we see their profound capacity for hope. The shared grave is the ultimate expression of the pair bond, the final, powerful testament to a connection so strong that our ancestors refused to believe that even death could sever it. It is a quiet, gentle promise, buried for millennia and whispered to us now. A promise that even when the last fire has gone out, even when the final story of a life has been told, the bond of love remains, reaching out into the great, silent unknown. For 2 million years, the pulse of human life was the rhythm of footsteps on the earth. The seasonal round, the endless journey, the life of motion. This was not just a phase, it was, for all intents and purposes, the entirety of the human story. But around 12,000 years ago, in different parts of the world, a new sound began to be heard. It was not the roar of a beast or the crack of thunder. It was the quiet, hopeful sound of a single seed being pushed into the soil. This was the beginning of the Neolithic Revolution, and it would change everything. This great shift was not a sudden event. There was no single moment of invention. It was a slow, dawning realization, likely made by the women who, as the clan's primary gatherers, possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of plants. For generations, they had known which roots were nourishing, which berries were sweet, which leaves could soothe a fever. They must have noticed that seeds dropped by accident near the camp would sometimes sprout into new plants. Over centuries, that passive observation turned into active experimentation. They began to save the seeds from the best plants, to clear patches of ground, to tend to the new shoots. They were not just finding food anymore. They were creating it. The consequence of this simple act was the most profound change in the history of our species. For the first time, we did not have to follow our food. We could persuade our food to grow right outside our door. The great, winding pilgrimage of the Paleolithic, the journey that had defined our existence for millennia, was slowly coming to an end. Humanity began, quite literally, to put down roots. And where roots are put down, homes are built. The temporary shelters of animal hide and branches were replaced by more permanent structures of mud brick, of wood, of stone. The seasonal campsite, occupied for a few months a year, evolved into the permanent village, inhabited year-round, generation after generation. This created a social environment unlike any that had ever existed before. Life became denser, more concentrated. You were no longer just with your small, mobile band of kin. You were living alongside the same dozens, or even hundreds, of people for your entire life. This transformed our relationship with the earth itself. The hunter-gatherer saw the world as a vast, giving entity to be moved through with respect. The land was a partner, but the farmer saw the land differently. A particular plot of land was no longer just a temporary stopping point. It was a possession. It was a resource to be cleared, to be worked, to be defended. The idea of my land, our land, was born. And with ownership comes toil, the endless back-breaking labor of planting and weeding and harvesting, all under the constant threat of drought or flood. This new way of life was a trade-off, a bargain with nature that had both blessings and curses. The great blessing was the potential for a food surplus. A successful harvest meant having more food than you could immediately eat, something almost unheard of in the Paleolithic. This surplus could support larger populations, and it freed some people from the daily task of finding food. They could become specialists, a potter who could make better storage jars, a weaver who could create finer cloth, a priest who could mediate with the gods of the harvest. This was the foundation of all future complexity, the seed of the city, of the state, of civilization itself. But the curse was real and immediate. The farmer's diet, often reliant on just a few staple crops like wheat or rice, was far less varied and often less nutritious than the hunter-gatherers. Living in close quarters with each other and with domesticated animals created a perfect breeding ground for new and devastating diseases. And while the surplus brought security, it also brought vulnerability. A single failed crop could mean starvation for an entire village. And for the first time in history, people had fixed immovable property land, homes, stored grain that could be coveted, stolen, and killed for. The world, in many ways, had become a more dangerous and fragile place. This was the new world in which our ancestors now found themselves. The great shift from a nomadic life to a settled one changed their diet, their health, their homes, their society, and their very way of thinking about the world. And it would fundamentally reshape the landscape of the human heart. The rules of love, of family, and of community, all forged in a world of motion and shared experience, would now have to be rewritten for a new world of property, of permanence, and of place. With the great shift to a settled life, humanity acquired something it had never truly possessed before: property. In the old world, a person might own a spear, a cloak, a necklace of shells, things they could carry. But now, for the first time, a family could point to a piece of the earth itself, a field cleared of stones and planted with wheat, and say, "This is ours." This was not just a change in economics. It was a change in the human mind. And it would send ripples through the very structure of love and family. In this new agricultural world, land was the ultimate form of wealth. It was the source of all food, all security, all potential for a future. A family with fertile, productive land was a family that could thrive. A family without it was at the mercy of others. Land was power. But this new and precious resource came with a question that had never needed to be asked before in such a formal way: when you die, what happens to your land? A hunter's skill dies with him. A woman's knowledge of plants can be passed on through teaching, but it is intangible. A plot of land, however, is a physical, permanent asset. It cannot be buried with the dead. It must be passed on. And so, the entirely new human problem of inheritance was born. The need to solve this problem would create one of the most powerful and enduring forces in human society: the concept of the family line, of lineage. Suddenly, it became critically important to know, with absolute certainty, who your children were. More specifically, in many of the societies that developed, it became essential to know who your sons were. For reasons we will explore, the land and the family name were often passed down from father to son. The focus of the family began to shift. In the old world, the most important bonds were often the horizontal ones, the network of cooperation across the entire clan. In this new world, the vertical bonds, the direct line of inheritance from one generation to the next, grew to be paramount. Your connection to your dead grandfather and your unborn grandson became, in an economic sense, more important than your connection to your neighbor. And this had a profound effect on the nature of the pair bond itself. The bond between a man and a woman, which in the old world was primarily a personal and practical partnership for raising children, now began to take on a new and heavy weight. It became an economic contract. Marriage, as a formal, public institution, began to change. It was now the primary tool for solving the problem of inheritance. It was a public declaration of which children were the legitimate heirs to the family's land and property. The fidelity of women, which had always been an evolutionary concern for males, now became a matter of intense social and economic importance. A wife's infidelity didn't just threaten her husband's genetic legacy, it threatened the entire economic order of his family. An illegitimate child could throw the entire system of inheritance into chaos. As a result, societies began to place enormous pressure and increasingly strict rules on female behavior, creating systems of social control that had never existed in the more fluid world of the hunter-gatherer band. And for the first time in our story, a deep and powerful tension could arise between love and duty. For countless generations, the choice of a partner was a personal affair, guided by the ancient rules of attraction and the practical needs of a life in motion. But now, that choice could be a matter of family strategy. A marriage might be arranged not because two young people were in love, but because their union would join two adjacent fields into a larger, more powerful farm. A partner was chosen for the land they would bring, not the feelings they inspired. The ancient, personal chemistry of love was still there, of course, bubbling under the surface. But now, it often had to compete with a new and rigid set of social and economic expectations. The family, that flexible, mobile unit of survival we saw in the Paleolithic, was transforming. It was becoming a fixed economic entity, a small corporation whose primary business was the management of property and the production of heirs to inherit it. Love, that wild and ancient instinct, was now being asked to live within the walls of this new institution. Sometimes it flourished there, but sometimes it found itself a prisoner. The human heart, for the first time, now had to contend with a ledger. The ideas of property and lineage can feel abstract. So let us ground ourselves. Let us visit a place where these new ideas were taking shape, one of the world's earliest large settlements, a sprawling town that existed in modern-day Turkey around 9,000 years ago. This is Catalhoyuk. It is not quite a city, but it is far more than a village. It is a snapshot of humanity in the middle of this great transition, and it shows us how our ancestors grappled with the challenge of living together in one place, permanently. The first thing you would notice about Catalhoyuk is what it doesn't have. It has no streets, it has no alleys, it has no ground floor doors. Instead, it is a dense, tightly packed honeycomb of mud brick houses, all built right up against one another, sharing walls. The town looked like a single, sprawling building. So how did people get around? They walked on the roofs. The flat rooftops were the communal highways, the public squares, the plazas of this ancient town. To get into your home, you would climb down a wooden ladder through a hole in your own ceiling. This unique architecture created a fascinating dynamic. Life was intensely public and intensely private at the same time. On the rooftops, you were part of a bustling community. You would see your neighbors every day, watch their children play, smell their cooking, and hear their conversations. A high degree of cooperation was essential just to function. But once you descended that ladder into the quiet of your own home, you were in the private, sacred space of your family. And what a space it was. The archaeology of Catalhoyuk reveals that these homes were kept remarkably clean. They had distinct areas for different activities. There was a hearth for cooking, clean platforms for sleeping, and other areas for crafting tools or weaving baskets. The home was the center of the family's economic life. But it was much more than that. The walls were often coated in a fine white plaster, and many were decorated with stunning murals. There were geometric patterns, scenes of hunting, and paintings of giant bulls and vultures. The family home was also an art gallery, a canvas for their beliefs and stories. But the most remarkable thing about these houses, the detail that tells us the most about their hearts, is how they treated their dead. They did not have a separate cemetery. They buried their family members under the floors of the house. When a loved one died, they would be placed in a sleeping position and buried beneath the very platforms where the family cooked and worked and slept. Death did not mean departure. The ancestors remained. In many cases, after a body had decomposed, the family would carefully dig it up again, remove the head, and rebury the skeleton. The skull was then often covered in plaster and clay, with shells for eyes, recreating the face of the deceased. These plastered skulls were then kept in the home, perhaps for years, circulated and cared for as if they were still living members of the family, before finally being buried again. This practice points to a powerful and intimate cult of the ancestors. The family was not just the people who were alive. The family was a continuous line, stretching back through the generations. Love and connection were not severed by death. They were literally the foundation upon which every home was built. What does this tell us about the society? The houses are all very similar in size and layout. There are no grand palaces for chieftains or large, separate temples for priests. This has led many to believe that Catalhoyuk was a remarkably egalitarian society, one without strong leaders or a rigid class structure. Each household was a self-contained, largely equal unit. Power was dispersed. Life here was a delicate balance. A balance between the public life of the rooftops and the private life of the home. A balance between the living family and the ever-present dead. The family unit was the absolute center of this world. It was the home, the workshop, the art studio, and the tomb. And love, in this context, meant a deep and abiding reverence for lineage. It was a love for your partner, for your children, and for the grandparents and great-grandparents sleeping silently beneath your feet. It was a love that was cemented in place, a bond built of mud brick and memory. For the vast majority of our time on Earth, in the fluid, mobile world of the hunter-gatherer, the relationship between men and women was likely a partnership of relative equals. Each had their own sphere of expertise, and each was essential for survival. Their contributions were different, but equally valued. But as the Neolithic world took shape, with its fixed homes and fields, a slow and momentous power shift began to occur in many societies around the world. The balance began to tip, and we must ask the question, why did so many of these new settled societies become patriarchal, ruled primarily by men? There is no single, simple answer. It was not a conscious conspiracy, but a system that emerged from the new logic of agricultural life. One of the most powerful theories is tied to a simple but revolutionary tool, the plow. Early farming could be done with a simple digging stick or a hoe, work that could easily be done by anyone. But as agriculture intensified, the plow was invented. This heavy tool, designed to turn over large tracts of land, had to be pulled by large, powerful animals like oxen or water buffalo. And controlling that animal and the plow required significant upper body strength, because men, on average, possess greater upper body strength. This crucial agricultural work naturally fell to them. The man behind the plow became the engine of the family's food production. And as economic power began to concentrate in the hands of men, political and social power often followed. The primary source of the family's wealth and survival now came from the man's labor in the fields. This created a widening gap between the public world of production and the domestic world of the home. In the old world, a woman's gathering could provide the majority of the family's diet, giving her a great deal of economic autonomy. But in the new world of large-scale agriculture, the main economic activity moved further away from the immediate household. Women, who were still the primary caregivers for children and who were likely having more children, now that settled life could support larger families, became increasingly tied to the domestic sphere. The home was their world, while the fields, the trading, the politics, the public sphere was increasingly the world of men. And in most societies, the public sphere was seen as more important. A third factor cemented this shift, the new reality of warfare. A hunter-gatherer band might have skirmishes, but large-scale, organized warfare was rare. But a settled village, with its stores of grain and its valuable, immovable land, was a very tempting target for raiders. For the first time, the defense of a fixed territory became a central priority. And the role of the warrior, the soldier, fell almost exclusively to men. As warfare became more organized, a distinct military class began to emerge, and this class was male. The men who were the protectors of the village very often became its rulers. Military power translated directly into political power. So you can see how these forces, economic, social, and military, all began to push in the same direction. A system began to emerge, a patriarchy, where men held most of the formal power. And this had a profound impact on the meaning of love and marriage. Marriage became, more than ever, a transaction. It was an institution for managing property and cementing alliances, and in this institution, women themselves were often treated as a form of property, to be exchanged between a father and a husband to seal a deal. The idea that a person should marry for love was often seen as foolish, or even dangerous to the social order. A daughter's romantic feelings could not be allowed to get in the way of a politically or economically advantageous match for her family. Of course, this did not mean that love disappeared. The ancient human need for connection, for affection, for that spark of attraction, is far too powerful to be extinguished by any social system, but it often had to go underground. It found its voice not in the official marriage contracts, but in secret love affairs, in forbidden glances, in the sad songs and epic poems of tragic lovers who defied their families for a love that was not permitted. The rise of patriarchy is one of the most significant and often tragic developments in the story of human relationships. It created new and rigid hierarchies, separating power from affection and often placing social duty in direct opposition to the desires of the heart. The balanced, interdependent partnership that characterized the Paleolithic couple was, in many parts of the world, replaced by a formal hierarchy of husband over wife, father over daughter. The consequences of this great shift are a part of history that we are, in many ways, still living with and trying to understand today. The story of the Neolithic is a story of paradox. Even as life began to center on the private family unit and its newly acquired property, humanity was learning to cooperate on a scale that was previously unimaginable. All across the landscape of Europe and beyond, a new phenomenon began to appear. It was the rise of the megaliths, the great stones. And these silent, enigmatic giants tell a story not of love for an individual, but of a powerful devotion to the collective. The word megalith simply means great stone, but it encompasses a breathtaking variety of structures. There are the single, towering standing stones, called menhirs, that seem to pierce the sky like needles. There are the dolmens, tombs made of several huge stones supporting a massive capstone, creating a chamber for the dead. And most famously, there are the great stone circles, cromlechs, arranged in patterns of deep and mysterious significance. The one thing they all have in common is the sheer, monumental effort they required. These were not projects for a single family or a small clan. They required the coordinated labor of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, working together over many years, or even generations. Think of the most famous of these, Stonehenge, on the Salisbury Plain in England. The largest of its sarsen stones weigh over 40 tons. They were dragged for nearly 20 miles across the landscape. The smaller blue stones are even more remarkable. Geologists have traced them to the Preseli Hills in Wales, over 150 miles away. How did they transport these giants with nothing but muscle, wood, and rope? And why we know that the structure is a masterful astronomical calendar, perfectly aligned to mark the rising of the sun on the summer solstice and its setting on the winter solstice. It was a clock for the seasons, a vital tool for these new agricultural societies. But an even older and more mysterious site exists in modern-day Turkey, a place called Göbekli Tepe. It is so old it almost defies belief. Built more than 11,000 years ago, a staggering 6,000 years before Stonehenge. What is truly revolutionary about Göbekli Tepe is that it appears to have been built by people who had not yet invented pottery or even agriculture. They were hunter-gatherers. Here, massive, T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, are covered in intricate carvings of animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, and arranged in great circles. The discovery of this site turned our old understanding on its head. We used to think that people first settled down to farm, and then, with their surplus time and food, they built temples. Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite, that the powerful, shared desire to build this great ritual center may have been the very thing that spurred people to invent farming, to feed the workers who built it. What could possibly motivate people to undertake such colossal, non-essential work? The answer must be a different kind of love, a powerful devotion to something larger than themselves. This was not about individual survival or family lineage. This was about the community. The very act of building these monuments, the quarrying, the transporting, the feasting, the shared ritual, would have been a powerful social glue. It forged disparate and competing families into a single, unified people with a shared identity and a shared purpose. This was also an expression of a love for the cosmos itself. In a world without calendars or clocks, the movements of the sun, moon, and stars were the ultimate source of order. To build a monument that aligned perfectly with the solstices was to create a connection between their small human world and the grand, eternal cycles of the heavens. It was an act of reverence, a way of saying, we see the pattern of the universe, and we are a part of it. And above all, it was surely an expression of love for their gods. These were the first great cathedrals. They were sacred spaces, designed to inspire awe, to host the most important rituals, and to create a bridge between the world of humans and the world of the spirits. The tremendous effort was an act of faith, a collective offering from a people to the powers they believed governed their lives. So we see the paradox of the Neolithic heart. Even as one part of life was shrinking to focus on the private home and the individual family. Another part was expanding to encompass the entire community and the cosmos itself. The megaliths stand as silent, weathered monuments to this other, broader kind of love. It is a love for the tribe, a devotion to a shared faith, and a deep desire to find one's place in the grand and mysterious order of the universe. The human spirit was reaching in two directions at once: inward, to the warmth of the family hearth, and outward, to the distant, glittering stars. And so, our long journey through the silent world before writing comes to an end. We have seen humanity learn to love, to form families, to build homes, and to dream of the gods. And yet, as we look back on this immense and distant past, there is something uncannily familiar about it all, isn't there? The fierce protectiveness of a parent, the spark of attraction, the sting of jealousy, the comfort of community. These feelings don't seem like artifacts from a lost world. They feel like home. That is because, in a very real way, this entire story is encoded in our own being. The dramas we have explored: the need for a bond, the search for a trustworthy partner, the careful navigation of social life, are not just historical events. They are the echoes of the very survival problems our ancestors had to solve, and the solutions they found are now imprinted in our minds. The brain we use to navigate our modern lives, with all its complexities, is still running on an ancient operating system, one that was programmed by the realities of a Paleolithic world. The anxiety we feel when a relationship is uncertain is a faint echo of the life or death importance of a stable pair bond for our ancestors. The deep, quiet satisfaction we get from a long and trusting friendship is the echo of the need for a cooperative clan. The complex calculations we make about status and reputation are the whispers of our ancestors trying to survive in the first crowded villages. We are living, breathing archives of our own deep past. The unwritten history of love is not just in the ground beneath our feet. It is in the very wiring of our minds, an unwritten code that continues to shape our desires, our fears, and our deepest connections. It is easy to think of love as a private, personal emotion, a story that unfolds between two people. But as we zoom out, we can see that the story is much, much bigger than that. The invention of the pair bond, that deep and lasting connection between two individuals, was not just a strategy for raising children. It was the invention of the fundamental atom of human society. It was the first, and most important, building block of civilization itself. Think of it this way. The family unit, held together by the glue of love and mutual dependence, was the first school of cooperation. It was in the family that our ancestors first learned the profound lessons of trust, of sharing, of putting the needs of another before their own. These were the very skills that, when scaled up, allowed for the existence of a larger, cooperative clan. The trust a person learned from their partner was the same kind of trust they needed to have in their hunting companion. The willingness to share food with one's own children was the foundation for the willingness to share with the wider community in a time of need. Without the stable, trusting relationships forged in the family, the immense communal efforts we have seen would have been impossible. You cannot build a Stonehenge with a group of strangers who do not trust each other. You cannot maintain a village like Catalhoyuk without a deep understanding of mutual obligation. The leap from a small, mobile band to a large, settled society was only possible because our ancestors had already mastered the art of the most intense and difficult cooperation of all the long-term, Loving partnership. Love was not a byproduct of civilization. It was the essential prerequisite. It was the social technology that taught us how to be us. As we journey through these thousands of years, what is perhaps most striking is not what has changed, but what has remained the same. The tools are different. The homes are different. The landscapes are almost unrecognizable. But the core of the human heart is remarkably constant. The quiet joy a Neolithic mother felt watching her child sleep safely by the fire must have been the same joy a mother feels today. The sharp, physical pain of grief that a hunter-gatherer felt at the loss of his lifelong partner is the same grief that can bring us to our knees in the modern world. The desire to be seen, to be understood, to be valued by another person, this is not a modern need. It is a timeless human ache. The comfort of a shared history. The security of knowing there is someone in the world who is your anchor. The simple pleasure of a shared laugh. These are the elemental experiences that connect us in an unbroken chain to our most distant ancestors. When we feel these things, we are feeling what they felt. We are participating in a conversation that is hundreds of thousands of years old. This shared emotional landscape is perhaps the most profound evidence of all. It tells us that despite our different languages, our different cultures, our different technologies, we are one people, sharing one very long story. The story of what it feels like to be a human being, with a heart capable of immense love and immense sorrow. The settings change, the costumes change, but the play remains the same. The timeless ache of being human is the deep, resonant note that has been sounding from the very beginning. And so, we find ourselves back in our own time, in our own complex world. But now, perhaps we can see it with new eyes. We can begin to recognize the ancient echoes all around us, the prehistoric patterns playing out in our modern lives. When we swipe through profiles on a dating app, we are still, on some deep, unconscious level, looking for those ancient signals of health, of kindness, of resourcefulness. The rules of attraction, written on the savannah, are still at play on our screens. The modern tension between marrying for love and marrying for status or security is the direct descendant of the dilemma that began in the first farming villages. The gossip of a small town or an office is the modern expression of the social monitoring that governed life in a Neolithic settlement. The fierce, protective love we feel for our family and our desire to see them succeed is the echo of our ancestors trying to ensure their lineage would survive to inherit the land. Even our greatest art and literature are often just new explorations of these ancient themes. The tragic lover who defies society, the soldier who longs for home, the family torn apart by jealousy, the community that bands together in a crisis. These are the stories we tell ourselves over and over again, because they are our stories. They are the fundamental dramas of the human condition, first performed around a Paleolithic campfire. Our world may seem new and strange, but it rests on a very old foundation. The past is not really past. It is a quiet, persistent echo, and if we listen carefully, we can hear it in the rhythm of our own hearts. And so, our story ends where it began. Imagine yourself now, one last time, sitting by that ancient campfire. The great stories have all been told. The day's food has been shared. The hunters are weary. The children are already dreaming. The great roaring fire that held the darkness at bay has slowly, gently, begun to die down. The tall, dancing flames have softened into a deep, pulsing glow. The circle of light shrinks, and the great, quiet darkness of the prehistoric night draws a little closer, like a soft, heavy blanket. The sounds of the clan begin to fade. The lively chatter has turned into a sleepy murmur, and then into a comfortable silence, punctuated only by the soft breathing of those around you and the gentle, rhythmic crackle of the last embers. The warmth on your face is no longer a fierce heat, but a tender, gentle glow. The world is settling. The day is done. The past has told its tale. There is nothing left to do now but rest. Feel the immense stillness of that ancient world begin to settle over you. A world without hurry. A world without worry for the morning. There is only now this quiet, this warmth, this peace. As you sit in that quiet, feel the connection. Feel the warmth of that first fire, that first family, that first love. And understand that you are not separate from it. There is an unbroken thread, woven in that deep past, that runs through all the generations, through all the ages, and it is connected directly to your own heart. The courage, the compassion, the desire to connect, the need to love and be loved, this is your inheritance. It is a legacy bequeathed to you not in stone or in gold, but in the very essence of your being. You are a part of this story. Every beat of your heart is a part of that same steady rhythm that echoed in the chest of our most distant ancestors. The love you feel for your own family, for your friends, for your partner, is a flame kindled from that very first fire. It is ancient, it is powerful, and it is yours. Let that thought bring you comfort now. You are the part of a story so much larger than yourself, a great and endless tale of connection. And tonight, that story has brought you here, to this quiet place, to this moment of peace. The last embers of the fire are now just a soft, red glow. The murmur of voices has faded completely, and what is left is a silence of profound depth. Listen to it. This is not an empty silence. It is the silence of the world before words, the silence of the great, dark forests and the vast, star-dusted plains. It is a silence that is older than any thought, older than any worry, older than any name. Let that ancient silence fill the room around you now. Let it gently push away the noise of your day. Let the lists of things to do, the conversations you had, the pressures of the modern world, just let them dissolve. They have no power here. They are too new, too young. They cannot survive in this deep, old quiet. Allow your mind to become as still and as vast as that prehistoric night sky. There is nothing to figure out, nothing to solve. There is only the simple, peaceful rhythm of your own breath, in and out. A rhythm as old as life itself. Let the quiet hold you. Let it soothe you. The last red glow of the fire has winked out. The darkness is complete. But it is not a cold darkness. It is a safe, warm, and quiet darkness, like being held in the heart of the earth. The past is quiet now, and it allows you to rest. The long story is over. Your own story can be set aside until the morning. Sleep now. You are safe. You are a part of a long, unbroken chain of humanity, and tonight, they are all watching over you in your slumber. Let the deep, dreamless peace of the ancient world be your own. Sleep well now. The past is calm tonight, and it allows it.